British cinema gave the world some of the most elegant, brutal, and psychologically devastating war films ever made, yet most people have never heard of them. While Hollywood was making patriotic propaganda, British filmmakers were creating moral masterpieces that asked uncomfortable questions about duty, honor, and what winning actually costs. Did you know one British film was so controversial that even the military establishment tried to suppress it? Today, we're counting down 13 brilliant British war films that deserve your immediate attention, because once you start watching these, you won't be able to stop. Number 13. In Which We Serve, 1942. Noel Coward didn't just star in this film. He directed it, co-wrote it, and essentially invented the modern British war movie with a single stroke of genius. Sisichi. The story follows a naval destroyer, HMS Torrent, told through the fragmented memories of survivors clinging to a life raft after their ship gets torpedoed. What makes this breathtaking is how Coward structures the entire narrative around the perspective of the working-class sailors rather than the officers. This was revolutionary for 1942. The upper-class captain gets maybe half as much screen time as the ordinary men who actually kept the ship running. The production was a nightmare that somehow became a masterpiece. Coward insisted on filming on actual naval vessels during wartime, which meant the crew was genuinely terrified that German U-boats would find them. The insurance company nearly had a collective breakdown. The battle scenes were filmed with such authenticity that returning servicemen wept in theaters, recognizing moments from their actual combat experiences. Critics initially dismissed it as propaganda, but within weeks audiences understood they were watching something different, something real. Number 12. A Bridge Too Far, 1977. Richard Attenborough directed and starred in this sprawling, ambitious account of Operation Market Garden, the failed 1944 attempt to liberate the Netherlands. This isn't a small film. The budget was $26 million, making it the most expensive war film ever made at the time. Attenborough assembled an absolutely staggering ensemble cast, including Sean Connery, Michael Caine, Robert Redford, Gene Hackman, and Laurence Olivier in a role that would be his final film performance. The scale is almost incomprehensible. Attenborough recreated entire sections of the Dutch countryside. He employed thousands of extras and actual tanks, helicopters, and military equipment. The production required permission from Dutch authorities, NATO governments, and surviving military commanders. The film is nearly 3 hours long and tells the story not from one perspective but from dozens, jumping between command posts, paratroopers, tank crews, and civilians caught in the fighting. It's simultaneously an intimate portrait of individual soldiers and an epic examination of strategic failure at the highest levels of military command. Number 11. The 39 Steps, 1935. This isn't technically a war film, but it's the grandfather of every British espionage thriller that followed, and it's set during a period of rising tensions before World War II. Alfred Hitchcock directed this masterpiece about a man falsely accused of murder who must evade both the police and enemy agents while uncovering a spy ring threatening British security. Robert Donat plays Richard Hannay with such charm and desperation that you believe every impossible situation he finds himself in. The genius of Hitchcock's direction is how he turns the entire landscape of Scotland into both obstacle and threat. Hannay is literally hunted across misty moors and through small villages where anyone could be his enemy. The paranoia is suffocating. He can't trust authority, can't trust civilians, and increasingly questions what he can trust in himself. This became the template for every British spy thriller that followed, from James Bond to Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. The film was made on a relatively modest budget, but became one of the highest-grossing British films of its era. Hitchcock's innovative camera work and editing techniques were copied by directors worldwide. Number 10. The Dam Busters, 1955. This film shouldn't work. It's about engineers, bureaucrats, and RAF pilots trying to design a bomb that bounces like a skipping stone, and somehow it becomes one of the most thrilling cinema experiences ever created. Operation Chastise was real, and it happened in May 1943 when 617 Squadron attempted to destroy German dams using a revolutionary weapon that nobody believed would work. The brilliance here is that the film spends almost as much time with the scientists and designers as it does with the pilots. Michael Redgrave plays engineer Barnes Wallace like a man possessed by an idea that everyone tells him is impossible. He's frustrated, desperate, occasionally furious that the military doesn't understand his calculations. Meanwhile, Richard Todd's wing commander Guy Gibson is training the squadron for a mission he doesn't fully comprehend. The tension between these two men, one who creates and one who must execute, becomes the emotional core of everything. Gibson has to believe in something he doesn't understand, and Wallace has to trust that his calculations will translate to human lives and real explosions. Number 9. Reach for the Sky, 1956. Douglas Bader was a fighter pilot who lost both his legs in a flying accident before the war. After the accident, he was told he'd never fly again. He fought back, trained to use prosthetics, and eventually became one of the RAF's most decorated and successful pilots during World War II. This film tells that story, and it's one of the most inspirational and brutally honest films about human determination ever made. Kenneth More plays Bader with such intensity that you forget you're watching an actor rather than experiencing the real man's struggle. The film doesn't soften Bader's personality for audience comfort. He's stubborn, sometimes arrogant, occasionally difficult to be around. But he's also remarkable, absolutely unwilling to accept limitations that everyone else insists are absolute. The filming of the flying sequences was revolutionary for 1956. The production got permission to film actual RAF pilots flying Spitfires in combat formations, and the aerial sequences remain some of the most stunning ever captured on film. Moore actually trained as a pilot and did some flying himself, though most of the flying sequences used professional pilots. Number 8. Hope and Glory, 1987. John Boorman directed this semi-autobiographical film about growing up in London during the Blitz, the relentless bombing campaign that the Germans launched against British cities from 1940 to 1941. The genius of Boorman's approach is that he tells the story from a child's perspective, specifically the perspective of a boy named Bill, who finds the war simultaneously terrifying and weirdly exciting. It's a film about how extraordinary circumstances become normalized when you're young enough. The film captures the contradiction of wartime London perfectly. There's genuine danger, real destruction, families separated and killed. But there's also community, strange camaraderie, and for a 9-year-old, an endless supply of interesting things happening. Bill watches air raid sirens with fascination, explores bomb sites like their adventure playgrounds, and gradually realizes that the adults around him are terrified in ways he's not yet capable of understanding. The film never judges this. It simply observes how children process trauma differently than adults. Sebastian Rice Edwards gives a performance as young Bill that's remarkably naturalistic. He never seems to be acting, just being a curious kid navigating an insane situation. The production used actual locations in London where bombing had occurred, and the recreation of wartime London is so detailed that you smell the rubble and smoke. The film cost £16 million, which was massive for a British production in 1987, but it earned its money back and then some. Number 7. Dunkirk, 1958. Before Christopher Nolan made his Dunkirk film, there was this extraordinary 1958 version that's been almost completely forgotten by modern audiences. Directed by Leslie Norman, this film tells the story of the 1940 evacuation from two perspectives: the British soldiers trapped on the beaches and the civilians back home trying to organize rescue operations. The film is technically a lower budget production compared to later epics, but the emotional devastation is absolute. The genius here is showing the evacuation not as a glorious moment of heroism, but as a catastrophic military failure that somehow, through desperate improvisation, becomes something different. The soldiers on the beach aren't thinking about heroism. They're thinking about survival. Back home, ordinary people are commandeering fishing boats and pleasure craft to cross the channel and rescue trapped troops. The film shows civilians making decisions that could get them killed, not because they're heroic, but because the alternative, leaving soldiers to die, is unthinkable. The production filmed extensively on real beaches and involved hundreds of extras and military personnel. The cinematography by C. Pennington Richards is absolutely gorgeous, capturing both the beauty of the English coastline and the horror of what's happening there. The film cost £400,000 and earned significantly less at the box office, but critics recognized it as something special. The Times called it the most honest depiction of Dunkirk ever filmed. Number 6. The Cruel Sea, 1953. Charles Friend directed this absolutely devastating film about a British naval convoy attempting to cross the Atlantic while being hunted by German U-boats. The story follows the crew of the minesweeper HMS Compass Rose through multiple seasons and voyages, showing how ordinary naval warfare wears down the men who experience it. Jack Hawkins plays the captain with such understated authority that you believe his word is the only thing keeping these men sane. The film was based on Nicholas Montserrat's best-selling novel, and the adaptation captures everything that made the book so powerful. The U-boat warfare of the Atlantic was unglamorous, monotonous, and absolutely terrifying. You spend weeks on a ship looking for something you can't see that wants to kill you. The film doesn't show much action. Instead, it shows the psychological toll of constant alertness, constant fear, constant loss. Ships disappear, men die, the war continues. Number 5. Oh What a Lovely War, 1969. Richard Attenborough directed this absolutely brilliant and devastating film about World War I, filmed as a musical. Yes, you read that correctly. It's a musical about the First World War. It sounds like it shouldn't work, but it's one of the most powerful anti-war statements ever created. The film uses music, comedy, and theatrical staging to explore the catastrophic stupidity and waste of that war. It's simultaneously funny and heartbreaking in ways that shouldn't be possible. The film opens on a beach where families are enjoying a seaside holiday during the summer of 1914, not knowing that war is about to destroy everything. From there, we cut between scenes of generals and politicians making strategic decisions and soldiers being slaughtered in the trenches. The generals discuss war like it's a game on a map. The soldiers experience it as hell. The contrast is devastating. The music becomes increasingly bitter and sarcastic as the film progresses. Songs that start optimistic become drenched in dark irony. The cast includes some of the biggest names in British cinema, including Dirk Bogarde, Michael Redgrave, Ralph Richardson, and John Gielgud. These legendary actors play generals and politicians with such straightforward incompetence that you understand the film's absolute rage at their stupidity. The production was massive, filmed on location with hundreds of extras recreating trench warfare. The budget was £2 million, which was enormous for a British production in 1969. Number 4. Aces High, 1976. This film, directed by Jack Gold, is about RAF pilots during World War I, and it's one of the most brutally honest films about aerial combat and the psychological destruction of war ever made. Malcolm McDowell plays a young, idealistic pilot named Gresham, who's promoted to flight commander and forced to send men to almost certain death. The tragedy is that he's good at flying and terrible at watching people die. The film is his slow descent into understanding that both are equally impossible. The aerial sequences were filmed with actual WWII-era aircraft that enthusiasts still flew. The dogfighting scenes are shot in ways that put you in the pilot's seat, experiencing the G-forces, the vertigo, the absolute terror of aerial combat. Between the combat sequences, the film shows pilots in their barracks, trying to maintain sanity while knowing they'll probably be dead within weeks. Some pilots don't even learn each other's names because naming them makes the loss harder. Christopher Plummer plays an older pilot who's seen too much and has accepted that he's already dead. He's just waiting for the paperwork to catch up. Plummer's performance is absolutely devastating. He's not heroic, not inspiring, just tired and waiting. The film cost £2 million and wasn't a massive commercial success, but it's achieved cult status among serious film lovers who recognize it as one of the most honest films about what war does to the human mind. Number 3. The Best of Enemies, 2008. Directed by Norman Stone. This film tells the story of the uneasy friendship between two men on opposite sides of the war in Italy during 1944. It's a small film that never received wide distribution, which is absolutely criminal because it's one of the most moving films about conflict ever made. The story centers on a German officer who's captured by an Italian partisan, but instead of killing him, the partisan, played by David Morse, forms an unlikely bond with his prisoner. The film is set in a small village where the line between occupier and liberator becomes increasingly blurred. The German officer, played by Riccardo Scamarcio, is not a monster. He's a soldier following orders. The Italian partisan is not a hero. He's a man fighting for his village and his life. The two men, initially enemies, begin to see each other as human. It's a quiet film, understated in ways that make it more powerful. There's no grand action sequences, no propaganda from either side, just two men trying to survive. The production filmed in actual Italian locations where similar events occurred. The cinematography captures the beauty of the Italian countryside even as it's being torn apart by war. The script, by Mark Nicholas, was based on real accounts of such unlikely friendships forming during the chaos of wartime. What makes this film remarkable is its absolute refusal to pick sides ideologically. It simply shows what happens when human connection becomes more real than ideological opposition. Number 2. Rogue Male, 1976. This is technically a television film, but it's more powerful than most theatrical releases. Jack Gold directed this absolutely tense psychological thriller about a man who attempts to assassinate Hitler and barely escapes Germany. Peter O'Toole plays the protagonist, a man who spends the film hunted across the English countryside by German agents. The entire film is essentially a cat-and-mouse game between a traumatized fugitive and his relentless pursuers. The genius of Rogue Male is its refusal to show the Germans as the evil cartoon villains. They're professionals doing a job. The protagonist is a traumatized man barely maintaining his sanity. The film becomes an exploration of what happens to someone psychologically when they're hunted for months, when they can't trust anyone, when they're constantly one mistake away from death. O'Toole's performance captures this deterioration with heartbreaking accuracy. He's not heroic. He's desperate, scared, and increasingly unstable. The production used actual English locations and created genuine atmosphere through cinematography and sound design rather than action sequences. The film cost £300,000 but became incredibly influential. It essentially invented the formula for the psychologically sophisticated spy thriller that would be copied countless times afterward. The final confrontation between O'Toole and the German hunter, played by Alistair Sim, is more about psychological warfare than physical combat. Number 1. The Bridge on the River Kwai, 1957. David Lean created an absolute masterpiece with this film about British prisoners of war forced to build a railway bridge in Burma under Japanese captivity. The film works on multiple levels. It's a spectacular action-adventure, a psychological drama about obsession, a meditation on honor and duty, and a damning critique of military pride. Alec Guinness plays Colonel Nicholson, the commanding officer, in one of the greatest performances in cinema history. The premise is deceptively simple. The Japanese commander, Colonel Saito, orders British prisoners to build a bridge. Nicholson, commanding his men, believes that building a good bridge will maintain their dignity and morale. What neither man realizes is that this bridge is strategically vital to the Japanese war effort. British intelligence discovers that an Allied strike team will destroy the bridge, but Nicholson becomes so obsessed with completing his bridge that he, incredibly, helps prevent its destruction. His bridge becomes his vanity project, and he can't see that this vanity is destroying the strategic advantage that could save lives. The production was filmed in Ceylon on location with temperatures that regularly exceeded 100 degrees. Guinness performed much of his own physical work, and he threw himself into the role with absolute commitment. The bridge itself was engineered to be genuinely buildable, and much of the construction shown on screen was real. The production cost £2 million and earned back £17 million at the box office, making it one of the most successful films of the 1950s. The genius of David Lean's direction is how he builds sympathy for Nicholson while simultaneously revealing his moral blindness. Nicholson isn't evil. He's a good officer trying to maintain his men's dignity. But that pride prevents him from seeing that his actions, however noble in intent, are betraying the war effort. The final scenes are absolutely devastating. Nicholson, realizing what he's done, has seconds to undo it. The explosion of the bridge becomes both triumph and tragedy. He finally sees his error, but it's too late. The film ends with him dead on the bridge he built, having finally, at the cost of his life, prevented the completion of his life's work. So here's my question for you in the comments below. Which British war film absolutely destroyed you emotionally? And here's the controversial part. Do you think modern filmmakers have lost the ability to make intelligent, morally complex war films like these? Or do you think we've actually gotten better at exploring the psychological devastation of conflict? Because that's a debate worth having, and I want to hear your take. Comment below, subscribe for more deep dives into cinema history, and I'll see you in the next video.